Hey, it's Peter with RL Property Management, the only management company in Columbus started and run by engineers. So I wanted to chat with you guys today about an important topic regarding short-term rentals in Columbus, Ohio, mostly Airbnb. There was recently some legislation passed that affects anyone who owns and operates an Airbnb here in Columbus, or anyone who's thinking about getting into that business. So I thought I'd just provide an overview of what's changed and what it means for you. So just to give you some context, I've owned and rented out one of my rental units on Airbnb for about the last 2.5 years. So I'm very familiar with Airbnb and how it works in Columbus, and I have a good understanding of what it's like to be a host as well as a guest. I've stayed as an Airbnb guest in other cities. So in the process of owning and operating that Airbnb unit, I get a lot of questions from other real estate investors as well as friends and family. They always want to know things like, do you make more money with it? Is it a lot of work? What problems have you had? And I do want to answer those questions for anyone who's curious. I'll do that at the end of the video. But I also want to just jump right in and talk about this new regulation that was recently passed. So in July 2018, Columbus City Council passed what they're calling STR regulation, with STR standing for short-term rental. And mostly it's Airbnb, but also other platforms like HomeAway, and in other cities like Vacation Rental by Owner, things like that. So they released these new rules last year, and they were set to take effect in January of 2019. And of course, they didn't release the rules in time. They were actually just released here on March 1st, just a few days ago as I record this. And so the rules are now released and they're in effect immediately. The city has graciously offered a 30-day grace period to come into compliance for the rules that they just passed. So in theory, everyone by April 1st who owns and operates an Airbnb will have completed the regulatory requirements that I'm about to describe. So what does this mean? What's the bottom line? Well, here's the deal. So the regulations that were passed, they have no restrictions on the number of nights that you can rent out your unit, which is really great for people that own Airbnb rentals. So you can rent it out 365 days a year if you want to. There's also no restriction on occupancy, so you don't have to be an owner-occupant. You can buy property specifically for this purpose. And there's no restriction on the number of units as well. So the Columbus has taken somewhat of a laissez-faire approach here. They're kind of doing the bare minimum, and they're basically leaving it up to the free market to determine these other limitations. So what's included? Well, if you're a host, you need to register with the city and then pay an annual renewal fee. And so there's a $20 application fee to become initially registered. Thereafter, there's an annual fee of $75 for an owner-occupied unit or $150 for a non-owner-occupied unit. The process of getting registered is very involved. You need to either pass a background check or sign an affidavit stating that the host platform that you're using has conducted a background check. You also need to be in good standing with the city tax department. So for those of you who are real estate investors owning property in the city of Columbus or living in the city of Columbus, you will need to make sure that you've been paying income tax all these years on any of those properties. If you've been doing the taxes yourself, that's something you may have overlooked, so you may want to talk to an accountant about that. You also need to obtain and show proof of proper liability insurance. So if you just own a normal rental property and you get a standard, what's called a rental dwelling policy, which is basically like a homeowner's policy for a rental, that is not sufficient. In fact, a couple years ago, went and got proper insurance for my Airbnb unit. It's different because you're doing short-term rentals. The premium is a bit higher because the risk is higher for the insurance company. So the city is saying you need to provide proof of that insurance with up to $300,000 in liability coverage, which I think is reasonable. You also need to submit taxes to the city on a monthly basis. Not really sure how all this is going to work. It's my understanding that in other cities where Airbnb operates, that it's regulated like this, The Airbnb platform actually charges the taxes to the guest and then remits it automatically to the city. That would be really nice if that takes place here in Columbus. Until then, I guess you should be setting aside a proportion of your proceeds from Airbnb and remitting them to the city on a monthly basis. You also need to display this permit that you're going to get prominently inside the unit that you're renting out. So that's an overview of the regulations. It's nothing too crazy. It is going to be some paperwork and a little bit of annoyance for those of us who do own Airbnb rentals. Overall, I think it's probably a good thing. It's going to give people who are traveling a feeling of safety that at least someone is, in theory, paying attention to what's going on with short-term rentals. And I think it's good that I hope Airbnb sort of integrates this into their process. I'm going to include all the details in the description. So if you want more information, the city actually has a bunch of documents you can read through. They put together an FAQ. You can download the application document, the background check information, everything else that you might want to know. I also wanted to mention there's a group here in Columbus called the Columbus Hosts Alliance. They go by hosts for short. I'll include a link to their Facebook page, but basically it's a group of short-term rental owners and operators who have sort of banded together here in Columbus and are sharing information and best practices. They were actually very involved in the process, met with City Council on multiple occasions to help craft this regulation, and were responsible for pushing back on some of the more egregious ideas that Council was considering. So to answer those questions I mentioned at the beginning of the video, in my experience, you do make more money renting a unit through Airbnb. So I saw almost 2x on the gross rents in terms of, so for example, the unit I'm talking about, I was getting about $450 a month in rent for a standard 12-month lease, and I'm getting closer to $1,000 a month gross renting it out on the Airbnb platform. So that's really nice. I will say though, it's a lot more work. And mostly when it comes to laundry and linens, you have to go in there after every guest checks out, strip the beds, get all the sheets and towels, and make sure those are washed and a fresh, clean set is installed and ready for the new guest. Whether you do that or whether you hire somebody to do that, it's a pain no matter what because no one ever does it right. You have to be responsible to make sure it was actually completed, follow up. So it's a lot more work, but if you're willing to put in a little bit more work, you can make more money. I'll tell one story about something that happened in the process of renting out our unit on Airbnb. We had a guest staying with us last year, and we have a back patio on this property that sort of overlooks the backyard on the second floor. Well, one of the guests was back there smoking and evidently didn't fully put out their cigarette because I went to go do something at the property and saw smoke billowing from the second floor balcony there. So my wife, who was with me, happened to think a little bit faster than I did actually. She ran inside, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and put the whole thing out. I went up there, checked it out. It was still smoldering, so we actually called the fire department. They came over and kind of did a little bit of demo work to get to the concealed part that was still smoldering. They put it out. So that was a little bit of a pain. We had to pay someone to repair the damage, and I had to negotiate with the guest to reimburse us for the cost of the fire extinguisher as well as the repairs that need to be completed. And the insurance that comes with Airbnb is not all it's cracked up to be. So make sure that you read and fully understand what you're actually getting when they talk about that $1 million whatever that they give you. But there's a lot of details in there that you need to be aware of, and it's not a replacement for your own liability coverage. So that's the scoop on Airbnb in Columbus. Let me know if you have any other questions. I'll be happy to chat. Thanks. Bye.